like to welcome you to another version of the Jam podcast or video. I've got Matt Ballard, who's what district is Claremore?
12.
District 12 District Attorney and President of the Oklahoma District Attorneys Council. Thank you for giving me this time, Matt. If you don't mind me calling you Matt.
No, absolutely,
Ballard. Got to speak the last episode with Mike Fields, District 4 District Attorney, and kind of began to prepare for some content for the victims forum that we're going to present, justice forum that's dealing with beyond victims' rights as opposed to what can we do better for victims on March 4th. And Matt has agreed to kind of speak at that forum, hopefully still, and give us some stuff here to kind of think about in preparation for that. And as always, we're not going to do any gotcha questions, or it's just going to be real conversational. A lot of it's going to be organic. So I just want to kind of start this off, as I do all of them, with who is Matt Ballard outside of your district attorney's role? Who are you as a person? What kind of things you like to do? Your family? Who are you as a person?
Well, so I got into this as a district attorney because I live here in the community, and I was interested in what I could do to help make the community safer. We're here in Claremore today. I'm from Claremore. I grew up near Oologah, graduated from Claremore High School. Moved away for college, and then moved back once I had kids. So
where'd you go to college at?
OU.
I won't hold that against you.
I spent 7 years getting educated in Norman. So I stayed there for those 7 years, and then went to work in the Oklahoma County District Attorney's Office. Did the drive up I-35. I think it was under construction the entire time that I was working there. It very, very well may still be. But I absolutely loved being a prosecutor, and jumped into the Oklahoma County office. And then, like I said, we had our first kid, and realized that my parents still lived in Claremore, and my sister had moved back. And we realized that once we started a family, we wanted a community that felt like home. And being from here, I made the decision to move back. So I moved back in 2006, and now I've got 3 kids and a little more gray hair. But I went into private practice when I moved back, and enjoyed that very much. I left the DA's office. Thought that I was done. I cashed out of my retirement. I mean, I walked away and thought I was done with being a prosecutor, and I'd be a responsible attorney and provide for my family. And it did very well, enjoyed it, but realized in the back of my mind there's always kind of this itch that I wanted to get back into public service. And in 2014, saw an opportunity, saw a need in the community that we needed a district attorney here that would work with law enforcement, would stand up for victims, and decided that that's where kind of my heart told me to go. Did a lot of praying about it, and felt that God was pulling me in that direction, and so ended up throwing my name in the hat and was elected in 2014 and took office in 2015. So this is something that I'm passionate about. I'm from here. I live here. My sister lives here. My sister lives right next door to me. I still have my mom, my aunt, so a whole bunch of family members here. And I think it's important that the district attorney's office can serve as a hub for all of law enforcement, for victims, for our witnesses. I mean, can really do a lot in the community. And so that's how I came to be sitting here talking to you today. But something that I'm passionate about, and that I feel really good about how I got here and what we're doing.
I appreciate that, and it's good to know that people, they come from where they're serving because you have a vested interest in your community.
Yeah.
My story is a little bit of the opposite of yours, obviously. For those that have read anything from the website, but I appreciate the opportunity to sit with you and for you to engage conversation with me, regardless of our backgrounds and your title or my title. I think we share a common goal, and that's a safer community. I have an 8-year-old daughter and wife that I love dearly, none of which that I deserve, but God has allowed me to have anyways. And I want to help. I can't change the things that I've done in my past, but I can create a safer future for my family, work with you to create a safer future for your family. And obviously part of that is helping to not just enforce the laws or create new laws, but to protect certain parts of our society that are more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Um, and that vulnerable population typically becomes victims of some sort. We was discussing before we started recording, and I'll kind of set the stage, and then I'll ask you to kind of give us an overview, and we'll get a lot of this at the actual forum, but just as an example, the forum is titled Oklahoma Justice Awareness Forum Beyond Victims' Rights. We have the Constitution of Rights for victims, and the offenders aren't supposed to get anything more than what the victims get. But I don't think that actually is what happens in Oklahoma or any state really. 2020, there was almost 18,000 violent crimes in Oklahoma. If we just guess, just as an average of two victims per violent crime, and that would be two surviving victims of violent crime.
Right.
That's 36,000 victims in 1 year in Oklahoma, just of violent crime. The same counting the non-violent crimes, drug offenses where there's not anybody hurt. Kind of tell us a little bit how Oklahoma, give us an overview of the good, the bad, and the ugly of how we address those 36,000 people each year for victims.
It's a challenge. I mean, it's a huge challenge for any DA's office, but when I say it's a challenge, it's also a responsibility that I know other DAs across the state take very seriously. It's an obligation that's placed on us by the Oklahoma Constitution. We're fortunate we're one of the states that has a Victims' Bill of Rights. We have Marsy's Law that went into effect just a few years ago that enshrines rights for victims of crime and gives them the right to be present at proceedings, to be heard, to be advised of what's happening with their criminal case. We were doing that long before Marsy's Law became law, but it really gave us something we could go to our judges and explain to them, here's why we can't do a case today. Here's why we need time to go to our victims and let them know where we are in the process. So you hit the nail on the head that, I mean, it's a huge number of victims that we deal with. Historically, those have been funded. The way that the funding works is there's about one victim witness coordinator per district.
That means there's only 27.
Yes, yeah, 20 or 27 district attorneys, 27 victim witness coordinators. That's what we're funded for. Now we realize that 27 is not nearly enough victim witness coordinators to handle that volume of crime, because not only are they dealing with victims of crime, but I mean they're helping set up witness interviews. I mean there are all kinds of things that they're doing, preparing victims' compensation. Oklahoma has a fund that victims can apply to be compensated for their injuries, and so there are a range of services that they have to do and are responsible for. Well, 27 isn't nearly enough, and so that leaves the district attorneys scrambling to try to find additional funding to maximize our resources. In my district, and in a lot of districts across the state, we're fortunate that we've received some federal funds. There are there's a VAWA and VOCA grants. They're for violent crimes. That money comes and goes, though, and what we've seen is it's dependent on a federal allocation and Congress deciding how much money to put in the fund, and then that gets allocated. So it makes it difficult that if you depend on those funds and you lose a portion, then you're having to move people off dealing directly with victims to do other things in the office and make up other shortfalls in other areas. And so we're constantly dealing with the need, which is huge, and then the lack of resources to properly address that. I can tell you my victim advocates are, I mean, they're some of the hardest workers, most passionate, most zealous people in the office, because they become invested in this. I mean, even more sometimes than a prosecutor, because the victim advocate is the person that's actually making the phone calls directly. I mean, it serves as a liaison between the prosecutor and the victim. So they're the ones a lot of times making that that initial contact. We send out letters immediately upon filing charges. They're the ones following up with that, who are actually telling victims, here's when your court date is, here's what that means. Now, they will come in and talk to a prosecutor, but
Sure.
the vast majority of that contact is with your victim advocate. And to only have 27 of those is simply not enough for the system, and it makes it very difficult. Now, I think that they rise to that challenge, but I also think, how much more could we do?
Sure, absolutely.
And that's the side of me is we're doing, the best we can with what we have, but if we had more resources, it would be tremendous that we could do so much more.
And that's why that's why I decided to title it Beyond Victims' Rights, because we know that there are those rights in the Constitution of Oklahoma now, and we want to provide to the absolute best of our ability and to the needs every component of those rights. But as a society, shouldn't we strive to do more than the bare minimum?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we strive to surround these people with every possible ounce of care that we can give them throughout this? Because it's not just about navigating the
Absolutely.
prosecution. There's the emotional, the trauma of we've talked in some of the planning sessions for the forum, but trauma impact centers, trauma counselors. We actually had a trauma counselor on hand when we did the planning session, because we had a couple of the victims that were there kind of sharing their stories and doing stuff just in case they needed that. And that was just one little 1 hour session.
Right.
And if you're dealing with all of these people, and this may be a wrong assumption on my part, but I want to assume that the funded position that you guys have isn't necessarily trained or certified as in a counseling capacity.
Yeah,
to deal with these victims.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, they do receive training. There's mandatory training that through the Attorney General's office that our victim advocates go to every year. But that's much different than somebody that's a trained counselor and is able to recognize and treat trauma, all the things that a victim of crime goes through. Because you're exactly right. Being a victim of a crime, depending on the crime, I mean, absolutely carries lifelong consequences for that victim. It's something that they're going to struggle with for potentially years. And you're right. It's more than just telling when their court date is, holding their hand, which is a very important part. But you're right. If we could take that to the next level, where we're actually able to provide services to our victims, and we do a good job of referring them places, but it's hard to follow up on that, and it's hard. Many times our victims don't have the resources to drive somewhere, to take time off work. All the things that there are barriers to actually getting those services, and I would love a system where we could help break down some of those barriers, actually make sure that they're receiving services, and not just that we're sending them somewhere, but we're walking with them through that process.
Using my cases, because I always try to, because I use myself as an example, that I'm not putting anybody else out there. There was a life that I took in my case. Had that man been married, for example, and had children, now that is the case in many instances. That wife may have been a stay-at-home mom all of her life. Now she's got to go to work to take care of her kids.
Right.
Her kids are going to grow up with the trauma and the impact of not having a father, going through all of this stuff through school. What, as part of that victims fund that they can apply to, as far as not just beyond it, or does that just apply to restitution, or in any way does that help with the victims' vocational training for a displaced mom, or college scholarships, or whatever? How does that help the family of a victim?
Yeah, there are funds available for like counseling services, for medical bills, funeral expenses, things like that. But it's limited. I mean, and that's the truth of it is, it's a fund that offenders pay into, and so it's reliant on offenders paying in, on being able to replenish that fund. So it's limited in what it can do. It provides a great service. I mean, it's a great starting point, but no, it doesn't go nearly as far as I think a lot of people would like to see it into things that you're talking about. Because you're right, vocational training, college education. I mean, there are a whole host of areas that are going to be impacted, and it doesn't go that far.
And I know this is going to be a real bad analogy, however you want to pronounce that word correctly. I'm country and prison, so my vernacular is not always correct. But let's say we spend $25,000 an average a year on an offender's incarceration. I think last year's budget was somewhere between $500 and $600 million just for corrections alone. That's not counting the judicial system, district attorneys, law enforcement, all of these. Let's say we spend $1 billion a year in Oklahoma. If you look at the bigger picture in our justice system. And I know this is nowhere near would be possible, and I get the disparities. But compare that to how much we spend on victims, both immediate and long term.
No, you're exactly right. It's a drop in the bucket. I mean, one, if we have 27 victim advocates, I mean that is not, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what we spend. And what's unfortunate about that is that those advocates, I mean, our entire criminal justice system funnels through district attorney's offices. So all of that money for incarceration, every offender that is going to be incarcerated for whatever that annual price is went through a district attorney's office. There was a prosecutor that was in charge of that case. Every victim of a crime where there's a case that's been filed goes through a district attorney's office. So within the criminal justice system, DAs touch the entire system. Every offender, every victim of a crime that's prosecuted, all of that flows through a district attorney's office. And to see that there just simply aren't the funds there is frustrating, but it's also a great opportunity, because with a relatively small amount of money in terms of the entire system, you can make an outsized impact. So any investment in district attorney's offices are multiplied because they do touch so many different aspects of the criminal justice system. So I think there is a real opportunity there for our system to look at, how do we make sure that victims of crime aren't lost in the shuffle, and that we're doing more than just getting them to court and letting them know the outcome. We're actually looking at that healing process. Because the other side of this is, one of the highest indicators of criminal activity is being a victim of a crime. We know that that's a process, and that's a cycle that once somebody falls into, it leads to substance abuse, it leads to economic problems, and all of those are risk factors for additional criminal activity. So it is a real opportunity to have a big impact on the entire justice system.
And I don't want people to watch the video to think that I'm completely flipped on my who I am and where I have come from. I also understand there's a dynamic involved, that there's non-direct victims, like the children of the offender who's committed the crime and is separated. Now his family, his children, his wife, there's economic loss there. The society is, those children could end up in foster care, or there's an unbelievable statistic about the propensity for children of an incarcerated person to end up incarcerated themselves. So I mean, there's two sides to it, but all of that, I mean, those are victims of crime in essence. They're not the direct victims. I don't want to take anything away from the direct victim, because that's absolutely the most important. But there are other indirect victims that we also have to deal with, that increases the dollar amount. If you just look at it in raw dollars, that we just don't appropriate that like we could.
No, that's you're exactly right, and I do consider those to be, absolutely victims of crime. I mean, if you have children that through no fault of their own are placed in a household where crimes occurring, where drug use, where you have a number of risk factors. I mean, I understand incarceration being a risk factor for criminal activity in the future. But I think it goes beyond simply the incarceration. I mean, they're placed in an environment where committing crimes becomes normalized, where drug use becomes normalized. I mean, where lack of supervision. I mean, there are a whole bunch of things that happen in a household with where crimes are occurring, and they're absolutely victims. I mean, that is a great opportunity, and to break down in what we're doing as a society to address crime is we need to address it at the earliest possible time in a child's life.
I think in one of the interim studies, and Representative Humphrey will have to correct me at some point if I'm wrong here.
Yes.
But I think they actually gave the targeted age of most successful intervention. I think it's age 14.
Okay.
They said for a child,
Yeah.
that's kind of the target range to, that's where it's like they're at that crossroads in
Right.
their life right there. Regardless of the culture, the environment, some of it,
Yeah.
Children who are abused as children, young children,
Yeah.
obviously it's difficult to intervene in that situation. But just as being exposed to it from the parents, or like my situation when I was growing up, 14 is kind of that age, I think,
Yeah.
somebody said. So I'll have to get back with Justin Humphrey on that to double check my quote there. But why don't we, and again, I know this is not, you don't make these decisions, but why don't we as a society focus more on prevention? And interventions targeting, for every dollar we spend on corrections, why can't we spend $2
Absolutely.
on the prevention? Because at some point that's going to reduce what we are spending on the other side of that. Because at some point there's going to be less people going into that incarceration stage.
No, you're exactly right. I come from a family of educators. my sister is an elementary school teacher. Mom was a high school librarian. My dad was a superintendent. My in-laws, my mother-in-law was a counselor. My father-in-law was a superintendent. Everybody in my family. I'm like the black sheep of my family. That I didn't go into education, but I'll go up and read to my kids' class or visit my sister's class, and I look at those kids, and I know. I mean, you can see the potential whenever you look at a classroom full of kids, but I also know. I mean, coming from where I am, that I'm going to have some of those kids standing in front of me, and who have committed a crime or been accused of a crime. They're going to end up standing in front of a district attorney or a judge. Before they got to that point, though, a whole bunch of things happened. A whole bunch of things. They had a lifetime of experiences, or at least a childhood of experiences that led them to get there. The point in time at which to address that is not the point in time where they come stand in front of me.
Right. It's
to figure out, how do we prevent them from ever dealing with Matt Ballard, and nothing would make me happier than to never have to
work yourself out of a job.
Exactly. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we recognize that what happens in someone's childhood during those formative years is going to make a huge impact. And so whenever you look at why are crime rates high in Oklahoma, and you look at where we are in education funding, you look at where we are on substance abuse, you look at where we are on domestic violence, on child abuse, on our spending for Department of Human Services on our children, all of those categories create risk factors. So to attack the problem at the criminal point in time, I think is completely wrong. That's an aspect to it.
Right.
I mean, by the time they get to me, there are things that we can do, but we take drastic measures. There are a whole bunch of subtle things that can happen that we can make sure that the kids are getting the proper nutrition, are getting a solid education, are having intervening whenever they have behavior problems at a school before they have to deal with a prosecutor. It's absolutely an opportunity to do that, and that's something that my colleagues and I we get frustrated with, is that we talk about incarceration. Well, by the time they get to incarceration, a whole lot of things have happened that have led to that point, and so only focusing on incarceration, I think, does a disservice to our system. That we're not looking at what are the underlying causes. How did we get to this point? And it is frustrating for us because we say, oh, we'll take that off the table. Well, at that point, that may be the only thing that we have. So we would love to see, I would love to be able to take incarceration off the table if we had services that we could provide, if we had resources that we could send these people to. But, I represent a 3-county district. We kind of go from suburban to very rural, and particularly in our rural counties, there aren't services available.
Yeah.
There are higher poverty rates, and a lot of times, the best thing we can do is just removing an offender from a community, and taking that off the table without adding resources is very frustrating.
A little bit of a detour, but from that train of thought, that was something that I heard repeatedly throughout a lot of the interim studies this past fall from Oklahoma Policy Institute and a lot of other people, the importance of returning an offender to their home environment. And I'm not sure, from my personal experience, that actually is sound.
Yeah.
In most drug offense cases or violent crimes or nonviolent crimes that were motivated by drugs, returning them to that environment is putting them right back in the fire.
Yeah.
I mean, right back in the culture that nurtured them into the offender that they are. Yeah, maybe their mom and dad, maybe their brothers and sisters, but they're also the same ones as they sat there and were shooting dope with or getting high with or learning from the mom and dad. My first real girlfriend, I would sit in the living room with her and her brother and their mom and dad while they got me high.
Wow.
At the age of 13.
Yeah.
So returning most of these offenders to the environment or to their family situations, I'm not really sure is the soundest of strategies. At least I'm going to guess at least half the drug cases.
Yeah. Well, particularly without putting resources or doing something. I mean, you can't repeat the same behavior. Put somebody back in the same environment where they were. Don't give them any resources. Don't give them any help, and assume that now we're going to get a better outcome or a different outcome. I think you're exactly right, and that's why I say incarceration is not perfect. I mean, it is a last resort. It's not something that we enjoy utilizing, but as a district attorney, if that's the only option I have, absolutely, I'm going to use that. And if I have somebody that is terrorizing a community, is stealing, impacting a community in a bad way, and the only option that I have is to use incarceration to remove them from that situation, then absolutely, I'm going to use that. Now, I wish that we never got to that point. I mean, there are a host of reasons why we ended up there, but those are sort of, it's part of the same overall conversation. But at the point in time where I am there, for whatever reason we didn't reach them when they were young. They are there. They are creating problem to the community. That's the point in time where, as a district attorney, I think it's my responsibility then to at least remove them from that situation. And I'd love to, for additional resources when they go back, that we make sure that we're not, putting them in the same situation. But I'm limited in what I have. I've got my corner of the world, and I utilize the resources that I have, and that's what.
In the perfect Oklahoma, I'm not going to say the perfect world, but let's say in the perfect Oklahoma, what would, and this is not a surprise or gotcha question, but something you obviously have had thought about off and on, what would the perfect victims resource center look like to you that worked hand in hand with the district attorney's office and the courts? What would that look like, and what kind of services, at least base services, would something like that look like?
Yeah, so I think what in a perfect world we would be able to have trained counselors, trauma specialists, and the district attorney's office wouldn't need to provide those services. We could serve it as a hub that we would be trained enough to where we recognize this victim needs an additional level of service, and then could immediately send that person same day to someone that has the expertise and training to do an assessment and to help that victim start to heal. What happens too often is that we sort of recognize that the victim needs services, and we can tell them, here, go to this place, but there's no follow through. We don't have the time to follow through, make sure that they've done it. We don't have the time to hold their hand and take them to it. So I think in a perfect world, you'd have a situation where our victim advocates would be not only invested with the time, but would be expected to to take a victim, do an assessment, determine what services they need, and then take them to those services and make sure that they actually receive them.
When I have been fortunate enough to get to participate with assault class this year, assault and light leadership training. Yeah. When I first met former district attorney Wes Lane, he was speaking at my church in Yukon, Covenant Community Church, and he was speaking on restorative justice and the church's role in that, which was foreign to me hearing a district attorney talk about
Yeah.
restorative justice. Not that I was, I've matured a lot in my older years, but I never really thought of a district attorney involved with the church and restorative, because a lot of the services that we would like to see, some of them are being provided
Yeah.
through non-governmental sponsored, churches and organizations. There's a diversion hub that has been kind of trying to gain some traction over the last year and a half or so. But the concept of restorative justice is kind of trying to gain some traction across the country. It's not used synonymously in all contexts. But in your district, and maybe in other districts that you might be aware of, do you guys work with any form of restorative justice bodies or provide service providers, I guess?
Yeah.
And is that something that either personally or professionally you think is a good idea? Or, I mean, I've even heard of one called DIVA, where it was defense initiated victim advocacy or something like that.
Okay.
Where they try to do mediations, but the defense side is the one that tries to get that to where they can help that victim heal at some point during that process. So do you guys deal with any kind of restorative justice programs, or what's your idea of that?
We try to be as creative as we can and utilize the resources that we have. And I love hearing you talk about Wes Lane, because I have great respect for that man. I wouldn't be where I was today without Wes. He offered me my first job.
Oh, really?
That's who I worked for Wes during the entirety of his tenure in Oklahoma County. He was a tremendous district attorney. So he's had a huge impact on my career, and I appreciate what he's doing with his ministry and going out is really impressive. So yeah, we try to get creative. We work with very closely with a group here in Claremore. It's called Light of Hope. It was founded by a woman named Layla Freeman, who lost a daughter to drug use, and then decided that she was going to make the biggest impact that she could, so that others didn't go through the same pain and suffering that she did. They work with governmental organizations like schools, but they also have a faith-based side of what they do. So that whenever they go into schools to do drug education, that they don't obviously lead with the faith side, but they have that component to them. Through them, we have a panel that has been very effective, where we hear from family members of drug users. Where we send our offenders, they're required to attend, and they hear of people who have been impacted from the family side, so not the drug user side,
right? But
family members of drug users that have conversations and talk about, here's how a family member's drug use affected me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of a twist in the paradigm on how we deal with drug use, and it gives those drug offenders an opportunity to see things not just from their own perspective, but how is this impacting the family members and people that I'm close with, that means something to me. So we've tried to maximize those. We work with groups. There's a woman named Rhonda Bear that has a very good ministry dealing with female offenders. She does a great job in the state. So we try to work with these outside groups. Sure. But we're fortunate here in Claremore. We're suburban. We have some resources. We have some access to Tulsa, but we don't have the level of resources that Tulsa or Oklahoma City do. And so we have to get creative. Once you get outside those metropolitan areas, there are just fewer resources.
And that was, again, back to the interim studies of this past fall. That was something that was a repeated mantra almost, was the lack of resources and funding for the rural areas, which makes up, other than you take out Tulsa, Lawton, and Oklahoma City, the rest of the state is predominantly rural areas.
Sure.
And yet all these rural areas are lacking in the resources and funding in so many ways, not just with victims, but in a ton of other ways. Let's go back to the restorative justice concept a little bit, because again, a lot of that is being done, and I don't want anybody to think that the victims are going without services, because they're not. There's a ton of entities and bodies, both religious and non-religious, that are attempting to kind of fill that void that the state is not. Um, would your district and on behalf of the District Attorney's Council, is the concept of restorative justice in terms of maybe, and I don't have anything specifically in mind on this, I'm just, but would you guys be willing to consider a pilot project if somebody had one that would implement a concept of restorative justice across the state?
Yeah, in fact, the last legislative session, District Attorneys Association was supported and assisted with legislation that would allow a pilot program, and Jason Hicks, District Attorney in District 6 in Oklahoma, is actually starting a pilot program for restorative justice.
Awesome.
And that was an idea that he became very interested in. Like he was approached and helped to get that process through the legislature, which is not often an easy process.
No, it's not.
But that was one of our legislative priorities, actually, for the last legislative session for the District Attorneys Association, was getting that passed.
Is that something that he's trying to kind of lead but statewide, or in his district?
Just in his district for right now. Okay. So it's a pilot program. He's district attorney at Chickasha, that part of the state, just outside kind of the Oklahoma City metropolitan area. But no, it's a pilot program for the state to see how this concept works, just for his district right now. But then we'll be looking at in the future if it works as well as we think that it might. At trying to get some funding and implementing something similar across the state.
I'll have to look into that and kind of get some details from him on that, because I wasn't aware of that. Of course, there's tons of legislation that I'm not aware of. I don't read every bill that goes through.
Yeah, well, that's I'm glad you mentioned that. I can refer you to Jason, and we're excited about the prospects of that.
What would be the legislative agenda for the District Attorney's Council for this session that's 2022, 2023 coming up? What are kind of the priorities for you guys? I know McGirt is big on everybody's radar, but what is kind of an overarching, maybe top 3 or 4 legislative things that the District Attorney's Council wants to see happen?
What we're really focused on right now is trying to get funding for our system. We have lost, I think we're at about 20% turnover on an annual basis for prosecutors, and that's creating tremendous problems with the system. Because of McGirt, we're losing very seasoned, experienced prosecutors to the U.S. Attorney's Office, to the federal government, and to the tribes. And that what we're seeing is just an outflow of prosecutors that they used to be able to stay here in the system, make careers of it, and we're losing those career prosecutors. And that's creating a tremendous challenge for a variety of reasons. What I say, at some point in my career, a traffic citation was the most serious case that I had. A simple drug possession was the most serious case I had. And it's not until, as a prosecutor, you work, you get experience, that you start gaining a perspective.
Right.
And that's where you realize not every offender needs to go to prison by a long shot. You begin to realize who is, are good candidates for treatment and for taking a chance on and working with, but that comes with experience.
Sure.
And it takes a while to get there. And so what we've seen is the prosecutors who we train, who get that experience, are now leaving. So we're very focused in this session in trying to get funding for our prosecutors so that we can keep good prosecutors in the courtroom. We're focused on getting funding for our victim witness coordinators, for our victim staff that work directly with victims of crime. We've seen recent cuts, as we touched on earlier. The federal grants that we've relied on have been reduced every year. So we're making it a priority to go back and ask the legislature. This is an obligation that we believe is a state obligation.
Absolutely.
We have an obligation to our citizens to make sure that our victims are protected, that we have adequate staff to work with them, and we simply don't right now. And so we're very focused on that and making sure that that we're able to deal with those. It's a huge challenge, but something that we're definitely focused on.
Well, I would say if those were the top two, and you had no others but those two, I think
Yeah.
those two would be um, something our legislatures will. And obviously, there's a few that will watch this. Hopefully, they'll take note of that. But I mean, we've got to have. Cause when you get a young prosecutor or a young attorney in general, there's the academic, the pie in the sky idealism that
Yeah.
everybody walks into their career of choice with at the beginning. As you become seasoned, the luster kind of wears off, and you begin to see where your career
Yeah.
meets the road. And in a role like what you guys have, and the responsibility that you guys have, it's not just about locking people up and
No.
prosecuting people. It's you're kind of a shield to society.
Yeah.
And you have to make a lot of heavy decisions. When I spoke with Mike Fields, I mean, I think the way he worded it was the attorneys that work for him, he hopes that the decisions that they make every day keep them awake at night.
Yeah.
Because you should have a conscience. It's not just about,
Right.
hammer, 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 or let's just let them all go. There's a lot of things that you guys have to consider every single day that, to be honest with you, I would say it would take a tremendous strength of character to have to bear some of those decisions on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, I commend every one of you for that.
It's difficult. I mean, and it takes time to realize that. I mean, like I said, if the most serious crime you've ever dealt with is standing in front of you,
Yeah.
Incarceration looks like it might be appropriate. But once you get perspective and take a step back, you realize that no, this might be somebody worth taking a chance on. But there are professional risks to that. I mean, you have to know who's worth taking a chance on, who are the highest likelihood, and I encourage my prosecutors to do that. But it takes time and perspective to figure out who do we focus our resources on. Because at the end of the day, we only have so many resources, regardless of of our funding levels. I mean, we only have so much time in the day. How do you want to spend that?
Right.
And focusing on the true bad actors and helping the ones that need help is the best use of that time.
I'm going to say I'm a true one percenter, but not in the political sense of that. I'm a firm believer that if somebody like you, or somebody like West Lane, or somebody like that prison guard, or that whoever, if you see somebody, 100 people standing in front of you that have failed themselves, their families, and their societies, and you take a chance on every single 100 of those people,
Yeah.
and 99 of them fail and go right back to what they were doing before, but one succeeded, isn't that one worth the effort that you spent on all 100?
Yeah.
Or do you focus on the 99 failures? I like to focus because I am that one.
Yeah.
And a lot of people tried to write me off, and
Yeah.
a few people took a chance on me. And I try every single day to do that same thing. I focus on that one of the 100. You still focus on the 100,
Yeah.
but if you succeed at one, isn't that still worth the effort?
It is. It absolutely is. And Mike Fields, I mean, it hit the nail on the head when he says, that wants to have prosecutors that, that their decisions keep them up at night. I think that's a really good way to phrase what we do, because we do need to be aware that people need resources and to take those chances. At the same time, I mean, as prosecutors, we recognize our decisions are going to have real world consequences. And so if I take a chance on someone and they fail, it's easy for me to say that in the abstract.
Right.
But I can also break it down another way, which is if I take a chance on someone and they go out and victimize another crime,
Right.
then that's going to keep me up.
Yep.
And I realize, if they go out and they hurt someone else, it's not just that I've taken a chance and I say that they've hurt
Right.
themselves. There are real world consequences to
absolutely.
that. And if you take a chance with someone and it results in a child abuse, or God forbid, a death, or that they go out and take a life. I mean, those are the real world consequences that the district attorneys and prosecutors in general face every day. Is that our people don't just fail in the abstract;
Right.
they fail in the real world. And when they fail in the real world, there are real people that are hurt
Absolutely.
by that. And so it makes the effort is certainly worth it, but That's why we're cautious. That's why we want to make sure that people know what we do. We take seriously because it's not just an abstract.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can't imagine. And I don't mean to when I say that the 1 and the 99.
Yeah, no.
Because those 99, there could be some bad things that happen in those 99.
And that's what I mean. Yeah. I think people sometimes forget that side of it, or you don't think about it until someone points out that the 99. I mean, maybe they've hurt themselves, but maybe they've hurt somebody else.
It's good two sides to that coin. That you got to keep an eye on both sides of that.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I don't want to take up too much more of it. I know you got a busy schedule here.
Thanks for coming and making the drive out to Claremore.
Well, I appreciate you very much.
The second time that you've been out here, and I'm always happy to be a host. So.
Well, hopefully we'll get to have you on the 4th. And,
yeah, absolutely.
I'm considering trying to figure out a way to actually live stream it, not just record it.
Fantastic.
Because we had some issues with the recording last time. So we're going to try to avoid that this time. But I look forward to that, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good seeing you.